Today we're going to be looking at Alice in the Cities from 1974. It's written and directed by Wim Wenders, and it's the story of Philip, a German journalist who finds himself the unwitting guardian of 9-year-old Alice as they travel from New York City back to Germany via Amsterdam. Or, as the Oxford History of World Cinema tells us, it examines the nexus between perception, experience and estrangement.
And there's a really misleading, I kind of looked it up, one of the first synopses that came up says it's about Philip, who meets a young woman who's just left her husband at an airport and is surprised when their relationship deepens into something else.
That's
just completely misleading.
That's got to be a different film, or somebody that's blagging it after hearing an outline in the pub.
Or trying to avoid the entire angle of an older man looking after a child.
Yeah. There's quite a few, when you're sort of researching and reading up on it, there's quite a few reviews that make a point of it not being paedophilic.
Yeah.
It's a very strange sort of, this is definitely not a paedophilic film.
It's as if you have to tread carefully.
Any film that has a child in, you have to make
a child with an adult, you have to put firm barriers around it and say there is no sexuality in this film.
Yeah. I mean, but that is one of the most beautiful things about the film, is that it's definitely not anything like that.
So this is your first experience of it, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah. A friend of mine, Chris, recommended it, and he's a musician and doesn't, he watches movies but doesn't really kind of go off on one about a particular film. But when he spoke about this, his face lit up and he ran off to get the DVD and thrust it as if he'd been the guardian of this DVD, waiting to pass it on to someone. I'd never heard of it, and when I mentioned it to you, you said that you kind of seen it a few times and have a...
Yeah, well, it was on my short list. We both made up lists on our phones, didn't we, of things, contenders for this, and it was sort of in there in my list, but it wasn't something I was pressing on you to do.
Okay.
So it's like, yeah, absolutely, let's do it again.
Yeah, I mean, what a revelation. I feel like I've been really touched by this film. It was a really nice surprise. It caught me on the back foot. I wasn't prepared for, I've seen some Wim Wenders films, and, I find quite a lot of them difficult. I think I saw Until the End of the World when it came out as my first Wim Wenders film, and just I think I gave up on a VHS, at a point when I was really trying to be open-minded and absorb stuff, and I felt the same way about Paris, Texas as well.
Right.
But I think I saw it too young. I saw Far Away So Close and Wings of Desire and enjoyed those.
Yeah. So you came to it from quite late period Wenders, which is well, I mean, I guess it's sort of middle of his career now by today's standards. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to go into. It's effectively the same story as a lot of things that we do for the podcast. It's something that I saw a long time ago. Mm-hmm. I saw Paris, Texas first on TV, and without knowing anything about it, quite liked it, and then picked up an X-Rental VHS. It's one of the first X-Rentals I got when we got a VHS player, because I was kind of interested in it, and then by chance Film 4 did a Wenders season. And I caught this and a couple of others, but I wasn't being disciplined enough, and I missed a load, which I instantly regretted later, and had to kind of track things down on X-Rental copies again. But this is probably the second Wenders film I saw. It made a big impression, so it quickly became one of my favourite films early in my life when I hadn't seen many films.
Yeah, sure.
And it's kind of been on the shelf. I think I must have watched it a couple of times on tape, but it's been on the shelf on DVD and on Blu-ray since then, and I really wanted to go back to it to see if it was still one of my favourite films, because, I have a vague memory of what it was like.
Yeah.
Haven't seen it for decades.
How do you feel like...
Still one of my favourite films.
It's really good, isn't it? I was saying before, just before we went on air, that Chris lent me his DVD, and about 5 minutes in, I was like, oh man, I wish I had the Blu-ray of this, that Robbie Muller's photography, and it was all sort of grainy and pixelating, and it was really frustrating. So I think I'm going to pick up a Blu-ray just for archival purposes, just to sort of have it in the house.
Yeah, it was wonderful to see it again, and having to watch it twice. Sometimes you're just kind of watching it and making technical notes and just trying to quantify your responses to different things and things that you liked.
Critical and analytical.
But second time around, I was finding new things in it again and making, and as well as just revising what I'd thought before. I really, really enjoyed it again.
I really loved it. I love the way it looks, its pacing, the fact that there aren't any kind of huge moments, that it just sort of gently eases through these kind of what would be big moments. Yeah, you just sit with the characters all the way through. I love that. It's really sort of disciplined.
It's kind
disciplined
of disciplined in its relaxation.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, yeah, I really love that about it.
When I was just discovering world cinema when I was like 18, 19, there were the big names that happened to have had seasons on Film 4, so I was really looking into Tarkovsky and really looking into Wenders. And
what about like this German new wave? Have you seen much?
No, I mean I've seen some
Herzog.
I've seen some Herzog. I'm not a huge fan of Fassbinder.
Oh yeah, okay.
I mean, I can appreciate it, but it doesn't sit comfortably for me.
Have you seen World on a Wire?
No, I have it on the shelf, but I haven't got round to it yet. Like so many things, life is just not giving me the time.
Yeah, yeah.
All of these filmmakers get lumped into one category, but they all have very, very different identities in their filmmaking. But watching this again, you can see his own identity in this compared to, this is the first quintessential Wenders movie.
Yeah, he said that, didn't he? It was his fourth film as a director, but his first feature film that he felt like he'd made.
Yeah, and it absolutely kind of crystallises all his obsessions at the time. When you put him in the context of post-war Germany, I mean, the whole reason that kind of new wave of filmmakers sprang up in the 70s is kind of a response to the fact that post-Second World War Germany was afraid to have a culture. It had just been hollowed out, and because so much of the culture of the 20th century had been kind of co-opted or twisted by the Nazis or ground underfoot, there was just this cultural void in Germany. And the inability to kind of allow themselves to have a culture, and it was only like Wender's generation when they came of age noticed that, and Wenders was very, very critical of how American culture had kind of completely colonized Germany. He used to work in film distribution at one point, and it was just American movies, American movies, American movies, and how to sell them. There was no indigenous German film culture until these guys came along in the late 60s. And there's a lot of that in his movies. There's kind of references. It's kind of a bittersweet thing. It's a love-hate thing. He loves American movies, good American movies, and there's a lot of references to them in his films.
There's a nice interview with him on the DVD where he's talking about his favourite movie being The Young Lincoln, and for him that was kind of like almost a religious experience. It was such an important film, but having seen it on TV in the States where it had been interrupted every 3 or 4 minutes with a commercial break.
Is that the film that's showing in the motel?
Yeah, that's right. I read somewhere else that the film is loosely based on a book which also features the film quite heavily. So
yes, and that's why there's a reference towards the end of John Ford dying.
Yeah, that's it. We're just talking about the influence of American culture, but also, the character of Philip is in the States. We see him in the early part of the film exploring the States, doing this, kind of early 70s photojournalist road trip where he's taking Polaroids and trying to process the American experience, but is unable to make a distinction between the landscapes that he's passing through, like it's all one thing.
Just as a kind of petty criticism, I would say that if you're going to explore any country, then don't drive along the highways. So if you're exploring England, you wouldn't look at the motorways and the service stations and as an example of what that country's culture is.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point, but I also think maybe that the American experience is kind of like that. It is the Route 66, this idea that you're free to travel.
I think I'm being a bit petty there, because there is a line later in the film when he says once you get out of New York City everything is the same. I think he has done more exploring than we see.
Yeah, sure. He's been on the road for 4 weeks in film term. Should we talk about the cast a little bit?
Yeah, the cast and crew, because this is kind of a cast and crew that Wenders worked with a lot throughout the 70s.
Yeah, it's a sort of who's who of German cinema. Well, I say who's who is Robbie Müller and Rudiger Vogler. Vogler? How do you say that?
Vogler? I don't know, but that's my guess. It was really nice watching this again to see Philip Winter, to see Rudiger Vogler. There's a thing when you're about 20 and you see people who are a bit older and you think, I'd quite like to be like that when I'm older. I liked his clothes, which looked great at the time, and I liked his hair, and I liked everything about his demeanour.
Yeah, sure.
And his kind of introspection really appealed to me.
Yeah.
Coming back and watching it again, I'm still kind of in that mode. I was he's really cool.
Yeah, he sort of balances out the existentialism of his sort of lonely journalistic pursuit at the beginning with the sort of grumpy reality of being charged with a child for a week or two. Yeah, he's definitely. Yeah, I really liked it. I liked seeing him on screen. It felt really authentic and genuine.
I like both sides of his character arc. I liked him when he was kind of wandering around, completely disconnected from himself and starting to lose, as it says, he's lost his sense of self. But then I also like him starting to thaw throughout the movie in his little moments of humour. And
yeah, I think one of the interviews was saying he goes from living in his own mind to having to live in the moment, like that Alice forces him to live in the moment and to be conscious in the moment. He had something about him not even having time to take a photograph when that's all we've seen him doing.
Yes.
He's constantly got his camera out, and then as soon as he has this child in tow, he has to just focus all of his energy on that. When I looked at Yella Rotlander, who played Alice, she didn't really continue much with the acting. She did another thing for Far Away So Close, and then I think she's a doctor now.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's true of a lot of child actors. They kind of do it, but they have other interests.
Yeah, but just that she's so good, I just expected her to be like the doyenne of German cinema, and an old kind of dame. And
yeah, it's a remarkable. I guess it's a performance, but it just feels like a person on screen, doesn't it? It's
so real and alive. And although, didn't she play the old dame in Grand Budapest Hotel? Is that her?
I don't know.
No, it wasn't. It was Lisa. The woman that plays Lisa.
Oh, Lisa Kritzer.
Yeah, she's the old dame in the Grand Budapest Hotel.
Oh, okay. She was a star in Germany throughout the 70s, and I think she and Wenders were a star couple before they.
Oh yeah, okay.
He broke it off with her to go and live and work in America, and it was quite a media sensation at the time because they were Germany's golden couple.
Oh right, okay.
Movie couple.
Yeah, she's fantastic as well, actually.
She's great in this. She just sketches in that flakiness within one scene, doesn't she?
Yeah.
And then you've got the crew. You've got
Robbie Muller.
Yeah, Robbie Muller, and I think his editor, Peter Pritzgorda.
Yeah.
Wenders had already worked with him on at least 2 films, I think. And yeah, I mean, this was his crew for forever, really, up until the end of the 90s.
Yeah, well, 91 is the last time Muller and Wenders worked together.
Yeah, they had a big falling out over until the end of the world.
I remember that being pitched as a science fiction film and being quite excited to sit down and watch it, as my first Wenders. And I think I'd sat through. Do you remember that movie Slipstream?
Yeah.
With Mark Hamill, and
I remember it existing.
Yeah. Well, I remember trying to watch a few alternate sci-fis and just coming a cropper with Until the End of the World. So I'm not surprised that a few relationships were fractured after that experience. It's a slog.
Mine was. I mean, we were talking about it earlier. I'm not going to go into it, but it shot my Wenders fandom in the foot, that movie.
Oh yeah, okay.
And it's being pitched these days. It's been re-released in its full 5-hour director's cut.
No way.
Yeah, Criterion have just brought it out, and I think there's a release planned in the UK, and it's being sold as a masterpiece, and it honestly isn't.
Do you think it might transform into something sublime at 5 hours?
Well, that's the pitch. That it was always the understanding that the distributors would make a 3-hour cut, but that the 5-hour version would be the vendor's preferred version, and it never got to be assembled until recently because it didn't make enough money off its theatrical distribution. But I don't see how it can be anything more than 2 hours more of the same thing, which is already too much.
Yeah.
Amazing back catalogue of movies through the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, and the career of Robbie Muller, when you look at... I had to write them down because there's so many impressive directors. Films for Bogdanovich, Von Trier, Sally Potter, Jim Jarmusch, John Schlesinger, Babbitt Schroeder, Michael Winterbottom and Alex Cox. That's a pretty good resume.
Yeah, I've forgotten about all the Jim Jarmusch stuff, and I suppose that's one of the defining aspects of those movies.
Yeah, definitely. You can see the foundation in this.
Yeah.
For those black and white,
Well, yeah, I was watching this again and I was thinking, I haven't seen this since the early 90s, and I think I'd seen Stranger Than Paradise a few years later.
Oh yeah, okay.
And you think of the long takes and fades to black in that.
Yeah.
It wasn't a Robbie Muller shot film, it was Tom DiCilio, I think, shot that one. But yeah, you can definitely see the Wenders Muller experience going on there, can't you? And it's another road movie as well, isn't it?
Yeah. And Down by Law. It's interesting you mentioned the fade to blacks, because I was surprised at how prolific they are throughout this film, aren't they? They're almost every other scene just ends with a fade to black. It's
quite nice.
It's really nice. It's really sort of old-fashioned and hypnotic
And it's nice early on when he's kind of travelling and the scenes are short and disconnected, And it's basically like having a dot 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 at the end of a sentence.
Yeah, or like just closing your eyes for a long blink, and there's something really nice about it.
My favourite one was I think it's when he's driving from Carolina, and you just kind of come up to a rainstorm. You view through the windscreen, and it's raining heavily, and then you just fade to black, and it's just a moment along the way.
Yeah. There's a nice sequence where he's driving. He just closes his eyes as well. It's sort of that's kind of what it feels like to be him. I think in that moment.
I noticed this has got music by Can, who I guess were Germany's coolest group at the time. Although it's a very, very simple piece of music, and I sense like a half-day session. And
that's what it was. I think that he knew. So I think the editor had directed a film,
concert film,
and they went into the studio and were just like, look, we need some music. What can you do? And they knocked it out in about half an hour. I think it was just one of those like, we've got this. They were like, what's the film about? And they said, because they couldn't see anything, and then they just put this piece together. And then it's looped like 6 or 7 times throughout the film. And apparently,
great,
it doesn't even exist as a separate track anywhere. So you'll never be able to hear it unless you watch the film, because it's in the mix, and that's the only place it exists.
Oh, that's brilliant. And it's a really good piece of music, because obviously the sort of looping aimlessness works really well at the beginning.
Yeah, of course.
But then towards the end, there's like a synthesizer sound that sort of sounds a bit like a zither and sounds really European.
Yeah.
So it works really well for that kind of German and Dutch locations.
Mm-mm.
So we're trying to avoid doing the scene by scene thing, because it's too exhausting and exhaustive, and as you said just now, we tend to lose the bigger themes when you're talking about.
There's so many films that we watch where it's a pleasure just to look at each scene and each performance within the scene and shots and transitions, that it's easy to get lost in the technical aspects and not talk so much about the
big picture.
Yeah, what's the film about?
Yeah.
Why does it exist? Why does it move us? Why does it touch us so deeply?
So we're going to break it into, I guess, 3 acts and talk our way through them, but see if we can talk more about themes and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this has a very traditional 3-act structure, doesn't it? We have the first act is Philip alone
in America.
Yeah, and then Act 2 is Philip and Alice meeting and their sort of prickly journey, and Act 3 is their
bonding.
Yes. You want to be careful with the words that you choose to describe it. Their relationship, their friendship.
Yeah.
Act 3 is about their friendship and them accepting each other as human beings and respecting each other, I think.
So if we start in America, we see Philip in Carolina.
Is he at Surf City, which is North Carolina, I think?
I didn't realise until watching it this time. I always thought he was within New York State.
Yeah, I thought it was Coney Island or Rockaway or somewhere like that. But I think he's much further south, isn't he?
Part of the reason that Wender's got compared to Scorsese at this stage in his career is because he was doing that thing which was very popular then amongst that generation, of including explicit references and snippets to and samples from their favourite bits of pop culture as part of their movies.
So what you think him singing Under the Boardwalk is...
Singing Under the Boardwalk is the first example, and then I know it's a common thing to use music to underline the mood of the characters, but then if you notice when he's in a diner a few minutes later, Wim Wenders has a cameo.
Yeah,
he's the other person there who puts the song on the jukebox, and the song's first line is I feel depressed, I feel so bad, which kind of like, it's one of Wender's favourite songs, and it nails the character at that point.
Yeah, sure.
It's that sort of kind of like intertextual thing. And there's
they get away with it though.
There's a kind of like a film sampling thing as well, where you use either references to or direct quotes from movies that you like, that you want to comment on the action in your movie. Like I'm thinking of, I think there's a section in Who's That Knocking at My Door, Scorsese's very, very first, where there's snippets from westerns in there, just like, gunfighter poses, and it's using that sort of snippets, not just in the background on television, but actually cutting things in and using references.
Yeah.
And there's a really clever bit later on where Philip is watching TV in the hotel with Lisa.
Yeah. It's like a quite stroby montage of TV images, isn't it?
Yeah, but there's a really clever bit which I only noticed the second time round this time. Lisa's explaining what's been going on in her life and her relationship with her partner, and she says, he said everything would be fine once we had a place in New York. And then you get a cut to the TV, and it must just have been some random footage that they shot off a TV whilst they were there. But there's a little bit of a commercial saying, come on over to our house, used over that. And then she says, a few minutes later, she says, he says he'd rather kill himself and use shots of kamikaze pilots on TV.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's that sort of like pop culture referencing and bringing all that stuff in, which was quite a thing in the 70s.
Yeah, yeah.
You see a lot of that in Scorsese and a lot of that in Wender's movies.
Yeah. It's cool there, I think. Yeah, it's good stuff. There's a nice bit in that sequence where Philip's talking about American TV just becoming a commercial for the status quo. Like everything that you see is about reassuring you that this is how it's supposed to be.
I mean, he's the alter ego of Wenders at that point. Wenders had this kind of love-hate relationship with American culture. I think it must just have been Wenders' experiences being written into the film.
Yeah.
So Philip's been travelling America with the intention of writing an assignment piece about travelling in America, but he's been unable to write anything or to finish the story, and he's simply been taking hundreds of Polaroid photographs on a prototype Polaroid camera.
Yeah, it's pretty new at this point, isn't it? I think it's only probably a year old, the prototype. Is it
Yeah, according to documentary, it was a prototype. It hadn't even been released commercially at that point.
Oh, right. I thought it had. I thought there was, because I think at this point it's already on Starlab. I think it's up in space, being used to photograph sunrises and things.
I can only take Wender's word for it.
Yeah, okay.
I guess when they were shooting the movie, it was apparently this boxy metal camera that he's got was a prototype they got from Polaroid.
Oh yeah, okay. Maybe it's the one that has this sort of solar thing on the front, so that you don't have to focus. Whereas I think the 71, 72 issue.
One of the things I've always thought watching this is how unlikely it is that you'd be able to take hundreds of Polaroid photographs, because I remember how expensive the films were.
Yeah.
It cost a fortune for just like 10 prints.
Yeah, it still does now, actually.
Yeah, and he's shooting off hundreds of them throughout the film. This is somebody with no money. So Phillips...
It's a commission for a magazine, isn't it, the job that he's doing?
Yes, for a German magazine. But he's been driving and thinking and losing himself in himself and becoming disconnected from his sense of self. So the whole first act is basically laying that out, and it lays it out quite explicitly as well. There is a scene later on where he goes to visit a German friend / ex-girlfriend, and immediately launches into a long explanation of his current state of mind,
existential crisis.
To this poor young woman who clearly has no time for him anymore.
Yeah, she's definitely over their liaison, isn't she?
And
he starts getting undressed, doesn't he, to sort of settle in for the night. And she's like, yeah, no,
I don't want you to stay.
Yeah, that's it, you're not staying.
She kind of handily explains to him and to us what's been happening to him in very kind of straightforward philosophical terms, which is worth kind of quoting. It's a shame we can't do audio quotes because it's in German, but Philip says, I got completely lost, I became estranged from myself. And Angela says to him, slightly paraphrasing here, he's lost his sense of self long ago. He's always needed proof that he still exists in stories and experiences. That's why you keep taking pictures as evidence it was you who saw these things. Surely that's Wim Wenders, the filmmaker.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's a nice line a little bit earlier on where he's taking Polaroids and he says that they never look like the thing that you're looking at. They never look right. The way they seem. Yeah, there's something frustrating about that he's trying to capture a moment in reality and it always looks
it's not his experience,
artificial.
Is it?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, he's kind of a tourist.
The opening section in America is fascinating in lots of ways, partly as a time capsule of how America looked at the time.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I feel so much his intent, to show that it's homogenized and that it's, it can be soul destroying, but it also looks so attractive and so cool.
That's exactly what I wrote.
I'd love to have a muscle car, old battered muscle car, and cruise along those and just eat and drink the same thing every breakfast and stay in the motels. And
it's the irony of,
even in black and white, you can feel the neon and everything, can't you?
Yeah, I got a note here. It's the irony of these dismal-looking roads and motels look so fantastic once you photograph them.
Yeah,
it's like photographs by Eggleston and William Christenbury, those sorts of things. It's seedy surroundings, seedy environments, but they're so photogenic.
Yeah, exactly.
And with
it's a curse, isn't it?
Yeah, and with the passing of time, with this looking like a fascinating time capsule of another place that you want to go back and explore.
Yeah, exactly.
And when he reaches New York as well, it's got that really great New York street sound in the background, all the sirens and noise and...
Yeah, it's really good.
It's fantastic.
There's a couple of lovely moments when he reaches New York and there's just a shot of the dollar bill out of the window as he comes up to the toll booth, and then when he's in the tunnel, it's just two Greyhound buses side by side blocking the road. It's so iconic, isn't it? Just everything about it as a European makes you want to go there.
And the minute he arrives in New York City, it's those things that you see at street level, like the overhead railway and stuff like that. And I really loved that moment where he sells his car.
Yeah, yeah.
And you hear the organ from Shea Stadium.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you get this pan across Shea Stadium to the organist, and you think it's going to be a scene there. He'll go and visit a game because he's in America, but then it's just a little interlude.
Yeah, but I mean, I think what he's doing there is just saying that there's so many stories hidden in America. You know, everybody has their story.
That's really nice that that's something you got from the film, because that's something I got from it this time as well for the first time, especially now that decades have passed and a lot of people that you see in the film are probably, dead.
Yeah, sure.
Not so much for the New York stuff, but definitely when we're in Europe and there's a lot of scenes driving around and you see people just...
Yeah, but I think that's part of what the film is saying as well, that Europe, can, offer as interesting a world for storytelling as the States. The States shouldn't be the only source of cinematic storytelling for the audience's palette. There's so many more options. We should be looking more globally.
But I was thinking, just in human terms, I was watching passers-by in some of the long takes in the streets in Germany. And thinking, these are real people who the camera's just passing, and they have this is just like a fraction of their lives that we're seeing on screen, and they live out entire lives, and it actually gives you like a sense of humanity.
There's that,
and it's that capturing of real time, not in a documentary sense, but as part of a narrative, but capturing real people and real environments and real sort of snapshots of actual reality.
There's that exhilarating moment when there's a little 3 or 4 year old boy on a push bike in his nappy, and he just races along the pavement staring at the camera and moving at really high speed, and it's nicely cut with shots of Alice looking out of the window, so it feels very knitted into the scene. But that little boy's expression and the speed that he's moving at is it's really exhilarating. I love all those little details. I'd say the first act kind of wraps up with Philip entering the Pan Am building to book a flight back to Germany. There's a strike on, isn't there? So he can't go direct. He has to go via Amsterdam. Yeah. That Pan Am building is one of those buildings that I really love historically, because that's where they used to land helicopters on the top of. If you were flying into New York in a chopper, you would land on the Pan Am building, until one went over the edge and crashed into the street, and after that they stopped all helicopter flights into Manhattan. So it's for me, it's a really iconic building. I've shown my little boy pictures of the helicopter crash, just to sort of draw his attention to that particular building.
So we meet Alice and Lisa. Philip meets Alice in the revolving doors in a little aside as he's going into the building. Yeah,
I read, was it Alison Anders made a note for Criterion, and she was saying that this scene tells you all you need to know about the film, that the child takes control of the narrative because she takes control of the door, and from then on we see the film, pretty much all the world of the film, through her eyes.
Because he plays a little joke and plays along and kind of goes round and round the revolving door, and she's quite taken with him from that point on, isn't she?
Yeah, it's nice. Yeah, there's a nice sort of 1-2 shot of them looking at each other, and it's like, oh, welcome to the game.
Throughout the film, she's kind of, I mean, you don't want to reduce it to kind of like movie characterization stereotypes, but she is sort of, hasn't had a steady father figure throughout her life.
Yeah, that's it.
And she is kind of impressed with anybody who could be that.
You imagine the other men that have been in her life are interested in her mother, whereas Philip seems to be interested in her, eventually as a friend. It's just, I think, a nice change for her.
And there's that really nice point right towards the end of the film where they meet that young woman in the park when they've been swimming.
Oh yeah.
And go back to her flat, and then there's that scene where Alice is kind of left alone in the kitchen, and she can hear the laughter from Philip and the woman in the other room, and it's just that kind of slight disappointment of, I've been shut out of adult life. He's part of adult life, and I'm not part of it anymore. But
that's counterpointed nicely with the scene in the morning where Alice gets up. She's looking at the Polaroid, or not the Polaroid, she's looking at the film strip that they took in the photo booth, and then gets him out of bed and says, come on, let's go, let's get out of here, you've had your fun, now let's get back on the road. It's really nice.
I think the scene in the Pan Am building belongs to Lisa Kreutzer.
Yeah.
To build a character within, 4 4 or 5 lines of dialogue, and performance is that's remarkable work.
Yeah, and she seems very fresh, especially compared to the girl working on the counter, who feels very wooden and kind of threatens to upend the scene. And then Lisa comes in and just really brings it to life. So Phillips helped Lisa and Alice book their flights home, and they've got like 24 hours to kill or something, 24 hours before the next flight, and they can't go directly to Germany. They have to go via Amsterdam because of a strike. Lisa says, I want you to just stay with us. I couldn't
keep
bear
us company.
it. Yeah, that's it. Just stay. Yeah.
There's what seemed initially to me a very odd scene when I was watching this the second time around this time, where it's just Alice and Lisa alone in the diner whilst Philip's off making a phone call to his friend. And it seemed odd because it's the only scene in the movie where it's not from Philip's point of view, and Philip's not central to the scene.
Yeah, but I think it's that moment when Lisa and Alice are together and Alice says, what does he want from us? Which I think is probably, considering all the other men in her life have probably been her mother's lovers, the fact that Lisa is just saying, look, he's just a nice guy, he's helping us, he doesn't want anything. And I think her intuition is that he's trustworthy, that he's decent. We've seen, as an audience, we've seen nothing in his character that would lead us to believe otherwise. And considering the rest of the film is a man and a child together, I think we need to believe that he's decent.
After Philip has been to see Angela, his friend in New York,
who's told him he can't spend the night.
Who's told him he can't spend the night.
Put your clothes back on and get out.
As he was kind of presumptuously expecting to. He goes back to the hotel to stay with Alice and Lisa. Lisa's quite pleased to see him and suggests he stays. I kind of get the feeling he thinks he might be on a promise here.
Yeah, I think so. She sort of says unequivocally, you can share the bed. Yeah.
And the next morning, Lisa leaves very early. Philip kind of pretends to be asleep and not to notice, but he notices. There's a really nice moment, which I think people never talk about male loneliness in movies, but Philip is lonely.
Yeah, definitely.
And there's a really nice moment when Lisa leaves and he kind of realises how early it is, grabs her pillow to kind of have 2 pillows to sleep on, and then he can smell her on the pillow, and just kind of has this a really nice little moment.
I really like it that she's disappeared, left a note for him saying, meet me at the Empire State Building, left him with this child, all of this kind of overwhelming reality first thing in the morning, and he just goes back to bed. He's just like, I'm going to deal with this in about an hour.
There to meet Lisa at the Empire State Building, we're just bullet pointing lovely things, but there's a point of view shot through the viewfinder as Alice is looking through, which again, all these things just kind of flow over you the first time you watch it, but the second time it's like the way that it's following the bird through the sky is just lovely.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, the freedom of a bird moving through all that structure. Yeah, I love when they realise that Lisa isn't turning up, and he says, let's just go to the airport. I love the way Alice just takes out a chewing gum and throws it over her shoulder and like off the end of the Empire State Building. It just really made me laugh. It was such a kind of realistic thing for a child to do at that moment, just like, fuck it.
There's lots of really nice bits, especially in this sort of end of first act, beginning of second act thing, where you do flag up all the stuff that Alice does as a child. She's not some sort of adult in a child's body.
Yeah, that's it.
I really love the bit where they're on the bus out of New York, and he's pointing out the view, and she says, I saw all that on the way here.
Yeah,
she's
that's
just
it. She's seen it all.
Looking at her lap and watching, paying to watch crap TV in the airport.
Yeah. There's something about her kind of looking for screens, which, 30, 45 years later, that culture of children looking for screens as a way of detaching from, the mundane reality is, something we see everywhere now. It's prevalent.
And the little selfish things that children say, like, he comes over to see her when she's watching crap TV, and she says, can't you get me something to eat?
Yeah, do your job, grown up. Feed me.
And there's a lot of nice details in this about boredom and dead space and stuff. I did like the mood of the Amsterdam stuff. It's that kind of anxiety and boredom of being somewhere in the middle of your journey, like interim places.
Yeah, that's it.
I suppose it's like
limbo, isn't it?
Those hours between flights and stuff.
Yeah, he doesn't even want to leave the hotel, does he, in Amsterdam? He's just like, let's stay here, and she eventually talks him into it.
Yeah, they have a grumpy day bickering in Amsterdam.
She lived there before, I think, because she speaks a little bit of Dutch and is interpreting for him.
There's a scene which I think we should discuss if we can at some point. In the hotel in Amsterdam, Philip's taking a bath, And Alice wanders in and sits down and they chat. I think it's one of the scenes that would just never get made these days.
Yeah, but you have to look at that scene from the perspective of a 9-year-old, and I've got an 8-year-old son, and he has no respect for other people's privacy, and it's not anything other than we all live in the same space, and that's how children are. The only thing Alice wants in that scene is for him to get out of the bath and get out of the bathroom because she needs a poo, and she doesn't want to do that in front of him, but it's totally fine that he's in the bath naked. Like, it doesn't even, because children aren't sexual, so us as adults, we're very conscious of our genitals and their use, and sharing them with strangers is something, well, depending on the type of night you're having, but not something we generally do.
Yeah, my notes are getting sketchier and sketchier as this goes on, because I feel the film kind of front loads its themes and sets you up with these characters, and then just allows them to thaw out.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly that. Yeah.
So
that's one of its biggest pleasures, isn't it? I think all of those existential thoughts that you have at the beginning with Philip, to just free yourself of those and to live in the moment, it's such a hard thing to do, and Alice enables that in him. And also I think she's maybe learning to trust the integrity of a male role model,
I guess, not having spent a great deal of time with one.
Yeah, that's it.
One-to-one, really, without a mother's intervention, their mother being the centre of attention. One of my favourite moments in this is when Philip gets a haircut in Amsterdam. And it's just
for what it's worth, you can't really tell he's had a haircut, can you?
Well, it does look terribly, terribly blow-dried immediately afterwards on the bus, but I do like, that appeals to my vanity as well. In the days when I used to be quite specific about haircuts, for it to go wrong and for it to be in the hands of a child who's not really paying attention, it's really funny.
In terms of the kind of pivot point for the second act, we have Lisa's no-show at the airport, which leaves the characters to sort of determine what their path is. They either just stay at the airport waiting for her to turn up, or they track down Alice's grandparents and dump her there.
And it's a good kind of midpoint for Philip as well, because at this point he's still a little bit frustrated and fed up, and it's not one of those.
He's running out of patience with the situation, isn't he?
Yeah, he's running out of patience, and he doesn't really kind of understand how Alice would be feeling as well, how distraught she might be. And it's only even when she runs off to the toilets and locks herself in crying, he's still a little bit impatient with her.
It's a really nice moment though, where he sort of has to find his compassion. He sits outside of the toilet door and says, like, do you remember where your grandparents live? Is it this town? This town? And he basically runs down the list of every single town in Germany until he gets to like W, and it's Wuppertal, isn't it?
A tiny little aside, but I did like Philip picking his nose when he was waiting outside the toilet.
Oh yeah, okay.
Wenders and Vogler do the whole range of bodily stuff. There's a scene in Kings of the Road where he takes a poo on camera.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
It's in a wide shot.
Wow.
But it's just this is one of the things human beings do. That we can put in movies.
Yeah, you don't often see it in film, do you? Should we talk about the arrival at Wuppertal? Because the elevated railway is one of those cinematic surprises that I just wasn't anticipating, and as we sat on the train with them, looking out of the back window as it moves away from the station, and you realise it's a suspended
monorail,
suspended railway over a river, and just this shot gets wider and wider, and you see this like beautiful kind of industrial sculptural shape in this small German town. It was one of my right, I need to pause the film now. This is so. What is this? I've never seen this before. Never heard of it. I had to do a little bit of research on the railway. Did you look at anything?
No. I just thought it was a really nice shot.
Oh, I love it. I love it so much. That railway is the Wuppertal Schwebebahn, which is the world's oldest electric elevated railway, and was opened in 1901. And there's some really nice pictures of it from around about 1917. It looks so futuristic in this kind of, I want to say Victorian, obviously it's German, so it would be Kaiser, whatever era, but yeah, it looks like You Let Me Luther Arkwright, and it looks like that, it looks so out of place, and you expect like zeppelins and flying pedal bikes and all sorts of strange things. It looks so cool, and they still have the Kaiser's original carriage that you can still rent out and run along the track. It's still operational now, and if you look at it on Wikipedia, there's been a few like accidents. Somebody drove a crane into it, but there's one where it collapsed into the river, and the pictures are so dramatic.
That sounds remarkable.
Yeah, yeah. I have put it on my like destination wish list for next time. Kind of, if I'm ever in Germany, wandering around, to detour to Wuppertal to see the railway. Yeah, I really love. And in every shot where it's in the background, I find those really pleasurable.
Yeah.
When you see it just like cruising across, it's like,
yeah,
wow, it's so sci-fi.
Pan across, isn't it, as it goes around a corner.
Day, night, dusk, dawn. Whenever you see the railway, I'm very happy.
I like. Doesn't it run outside the window of their hotel as well?
Yeah,
that'd be great, wouldn't it?
It's so cool. I really love it. And it's only 13 kilometers long as well. One track. Apparently, Wim Wenders shot some of Pina there, his dance film.
Oh, the 3D thing.
Yeah, but I never saw that.
I think because this was very loosely scripted and shot chronologically, and by Wender's own admission, they were kind of improvising a lot of it, and they abandoned the script and would allow themselves to improvise a lot. You don't have that carefully scripted, oh, well, he was selfish, but now he is gradually softening, and you get these key scenes. So even when you get a moment like where they're staying in a hotel, and Alice has been crying, and Philip is still impatient with her about her crying, but then he kind of softens. So
he does tell her to shut up, like you do when you're really frustrated with a kid. Instead of just saying, "Look, I'm very tired now. We've had a long day. Could you please just like calm it down?" He just says like, "Shut up," and then she covers her head with the blankets, and then he tells her a story, which is another good kind of improvised moment, because it's one of those stories where he's just waffling. And I really like that he isn't pulling something out of his own childhood and telling her his favourite bedtime story. He's just making this up, and it's really sort of fractured and unpredictable, and then she just falls asleep just by the sound of his talking, and he sort of looks a bit satisfied with himself.
He's very pleased with himself for having done that, yeah. So in this kind of longer last act of the movie, the long scene searching in a car is where you start to see it's quite odd. As I was saying before, obviously there's stuff in New York, and having seen New York iconography and having been to New York, you'd think that stuff you'd warm to that more, but I found it was the stuff driving around in Germany that I warmed to more, that I was looking at the people and places and thinking, real people, real places. Exactly. The old couple he stops to ask a question of.
Yeah, well, there's an interesting little aside there, because they talk about Krupp, all these old houses that are traditional houses that have been there for 100 years or so. They talk about all he says is
Krupp wants to build a hospital or something.
Yeah, that's right. And so the Krupp family were the family that basically supplied all the weapons for the Reich. They're a huge dynasty of German industrialists that have been supplying weapons to both sides in most wars, and are part of the fabric of German culture. So I think that is Wender's little moment where he's acknowledging some of the German history with it and trying to counterpoint the more traditional Bavarian history, let's say, with more recent Reich history.
20th century history, yeah, that's it. I found the Cannes music really came into its own here with the driving around, especially there's scenes of Alice kind of watching from the car and falling asleep a bit and coming to, and that kind of looping guitar refrain really.
Those are really nice, because you would later find out that her granny doesn't live in this town, so as you watch you think that she'd be more alert looking for that, and you realise, oh, wait a second.
And there's the fabulous scene, I think it's the key scene that everyone kind of references from this movie, in the Ital Ice Cafe, where the little kid's sitting by the jukebox singing along to Canned Heat.
It's so nice. He's not even singing, is he? He's just like humming the melody and just doing on the road again. It's like he's heard it 1,000 times.
But it's the mood of the movie, though, isn't it? It's that kind of drifting in and out feeling. On the road again, commenting on Philip's predicament. He's on the road again.
Yeah, it's nice. Yeah, but there's nothing wrong with any of the detail in that scene. Like when Alice does confess that they're in the wrong town and she doesn't know where she is, and then Philip excuses himself looks at himself in the mirror, comes back, and it's just like, okay, I'm going to take you to the police. Like, you just realise it's ridiculous that he's running around with a 9-year-old girl on a wild goose chase, and just, has to kind of unburden himself.
Yeah. So he drops her at the police station, and then he has a little moment of freedom. But it's interesting, when he comes out of the police station, there's no kind of exaltation. He's just kind of a bit loose and a bit aimless, and sees the Chuck Berry poster.
Yeah, but I think he was sort of, enjoying the companionship as well, and how, uncomplicated it is to a certain extent to be hanging around with somebody so innocent and in the moment.
Did you hear the story about this Chuck Berry footage?
Yeah, so apparently they did shoot some footage of Chuck Berry at the concert, but he couldn't get it cleared.
Yeah.
So he went to Pennebaker and decolorized some footage of Chuck Berry that they had. But it was all about the song, wasn't it?
Memphis, Tennessee, isn't it? What's it called?
Which is a song Chuck Berry wrote when he was trying to reconnect with his own daughter. I didn't
know that one.
Yeah, really sort of underpinning again the narrative.
Yeah.
As you highlighted before.
But this footage and the scene that Wenders makes out of it is one of my favourite things of all time.
Yeah.
It never gets old. I always laugh out loud at the expression on Chuck Berry's face when the music finally comes back in time.
Yeah. He's having a nice time, isn't he? He looks pretty happy. It doesn't even matter that you can see the difference in the film stocks and the grain, and in the edit that should be seamless, but it's really jarring. But it's
you just have to give it.
Yeah, it's just really fun.
There's a funny thing about this scene. I'm not a fan of 50s, early 60s rock and roll, but this is the one time, perhaps the only one time, seeing rock and roll being played live, that I can appreciate how spiky and energetic and raw it is.
Oh yeah, sure. Especially imagine the era as well. What the rest of the kind of the menu looked like.
But it's the only time I can hear rock and roll and think how exciting it must have been for people, and kind of understand that experience, because a lot of the time it's just like a closed book to me. I hear it and I just think it's just like.
But you have to appreciate the historical context.
Oh, absolutely, and I do. But when I'm watching this, it's the first appreciation I can have for the raw experience of it. And think, I get that now. You see Chuck Berry kind of sweating and happy and loose and energetic.
Yeah, definitely.
And I don't know if I'm reading too much into the scene, but I know that Philip's enjoying himself, but I do get the feeling that he's wary of disappearing back into himself again. There's just like a sort of pause for reflection in one of his reaction shots.
Yeah, I mean, the next scene is Alice has done a bunk from the police station, tracked him down, been dodging police, and jumps into the car next to him, and his face lights up, doesn't it? He isn't like, what are you doing here? You should be like... He's just so happy to see her, and she remembers where Granny lives, and it's a few towns over, so he's like, let's go before we get caught. They're on the run, aren't they? It's a really nice kind of moment. I did like the sequence where Alice is talking about all the little notes that she gave the police officers about where her granny lived, and she said, when my granny used to read bedtime stories, there would be coal dust coming through the window and settling on the pages, making the pages rustle. I was like, wow, that's like so visual, isn't it? Like the detail that a child would be distracted by when they're supposed to be paying attention to the story. They're looking at these other things. I thought that was a really nice moment.
Yeah, it's so typical of the things that you remember as a child, though, isn't it? Those little vivid background things that never leave you. But yeah, I've just got like a real Cliff's Notes thing of I liked seeing the suburbs. I like driving around the suburbs and seeing the types of houses. Yeah. And the kid on the bike. I mean, I'm just enjoying being in the movie now, rather than analysing it as a piece of filmmaking.
Yeah, for sure.
The photo booth scene.
Oh, that's so nice, isn't it? Yeah, where they keep sideways glancing at each other to see what expression they're pulling.
The moment when they find the house is just like a little minor miracle.
Yeah,
isn't
that's
it?
brilliant. Yeah, and then he's just looking at the photo of the house and looking at the space, and it's like, wow, we're here. That's exactly right. And there is something like, oh no, that was a bit easy, a bit quick. And then, of course, Granny's left the house, doesn't live there anymore.
Watching it for the last time, I don't mean timeless in the sense of an all-time classic. I mean, it's a timeless movie where, for example, I was thinking that the scene that we're about to talk about, where Alice and Philip go swimming and meet a woman in the park who takes them back to her apartment, and they stay over. I think it's way earlier in the film, but it's like the penultimate scene.
Yeah, we're pretty close to the end, aren't we?
because you don't have that traditional story structure, and you're just happy following these people along.
Yeah. But this is where it is a road movie, where it's characters on a journey, just meeting people who are in and out of their lives very quickly.
There's a couple of things about the scene with a very pleasant woman. Her apartment kitchen did remind me, this is a very specific age-related thing, it did remind me of the 70s, but not the contemporary 70s. I used to have elder relatives.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Who lived in a small house in Kent, and the appliances in their kitchen weren't from the 70s, they were from like the 60s, possibly the early 60s, late 50s, and it's that kind of hangover of quite clunky looking things and surroundings.
I remember my mum had a washing machine that she still used tongs to lift stuff out.
And there's the thing that I mentioned before, is quite a good scene for Alice, because you get to see her having to spend more enforced time in the kitchen alone from the adult world, which Philip's rejoined, and she feels, you can see she feels not angry or upset, but just that mild, probably continual disappointment through her life, which has been excluded.
It's not unfamiliar to her to be pushed to the peripheries while the adults enjoy themselves.
And then suddenly we're in pretty much the last two scenes of the film. Philip and Alice are on a ferry over to stay with his parents because he's run out of money, and one of the policemen from the station has caught up with them.
I wonder if he wasn't on his way to Philip's parents anyway. That's probably why he's on the ferry, because they're like trying to track them down.
And it's not a fractious, angry exchange, is it?
No, it's really funny. They're both giggling all the way through it.
And he asks him, why didn't you come to the police and contact us? And Philip's like, yeah, I guess, but without saying it, the thing was he was just kind of enjoying an adventure, an interlude.
Yeah. You could imagine, if they hadn't been intercepted, that he would sort of accidentally adopt her at some point.
When Alice points out to Philip in this scene, you haven't taken any pictures for a while, and he realises he hasn't. He's been having experiences and
he's been
enjoying them rather than trying to evoke them in
he's not once removed from life. He's in the world. That's I think that scene where they're doing the aerobics or whatever it is by the side of the road, that's one of those nice moments where they're just completely existing without any conscious thought. They're just there doing it. It's sort of sad when it comes to an end, isn't it, when the cop catches up with them and it's just like, dude, she needs to go back to her family, and that everybody's sort of laughing and smiling about how ridiculous the situation is, but as a member of the audience watching it, it's like, oh, that's a shame. Could have done with another half an hour of this adventure. Now that they're really in a good kind of place, the friendship is well established, I could have done with half an hour more of just seeing what adventures they were going to have.
Well, it does give you a nice little reprise at the end when
totally.
they get to take the train journey into is it going to Berlin they're going to?
Munich, I think.
Yeah.
And I love that little reveal on Alice's like emergency money. Like she's got $100 bill tucked into the back of her kind of purse that she's been wearing around her neck through the whole film, and she gives it to him so that he can buy a ticket and come with her on that final part of the journey.
But it's not for the sake of an emotional fare or anything. They just want to spend.
Yeah, that's it.
Just sit quietly. He can read his paper.
Yeah,
she can
it's
do what
going to be another 3
do.
hours or something, isn't it? So let's take that moment. But she gives him that opportunity to just have a bit more time.
And it finishes on one of those hats off technical moments.
Yeah.
Helicopter shot starting
also,
on a zoom.
In terms of the script, I think there's that really nice thing where she says to him, what are you going to do when you get to Munich? And he says, I'm going to finish this story. And then he says to her, what are you going to do? And she just has that look on her face like, I don't know. But also she's never been, and probably still isn't, the architect of her own destiny. You know? She's tied to whatever whim her mum is acting on once she gets reunited. And then they just stand up at the window, don't they, and let the wind blow through their hair as they face the future. It's really nice, man. I was quite moved by the time we get to this last little moment. Yeah, and like I say, it's a very cool helicopter shot.
I shudder to think of the walkie-talkie coordination involved in getting a helicopter in the right place at the right time and locating the right window to get the zoom on. And oh man, so anyone who can do that now.
Yeah, choppering out to that super wide of the landscape. Yeah, it's perfect. It's perfect ending. Really satisfying. And it's nice because it's not the end of their journeys, their stories, but that's as much as we need to see.
So I was really pleased and mildly surprised that watching it again out of the context that I saw it in originally, when I was, hungry for world cinema and looking for new flavours and experiences, and this kind of like slow, not meditative or contemplative, but real time. I mean, obviously it's constructed filmmaking, but you feel more like you're living life in real time when you're watching it. I was interested and a little bit worried to see if I'd still be able to enjoy that, because without wanting to, basically my attention span is fucked these days for one reason or another. So I worried that I wouldn't have the attention span and I wouldn't enjoy it, but it was really nice, and it's made me want to watch the other two movies in the trilogy.
Yeah, I'm going to track those down and a few other Wim Wenders films for sure. But I think with this, the technique is there. The pictures are there, the characterizations are there, the confidence in the direction is there. All of the spaces that they move through are really visual. I just think it's a really great piece of cinema. I've watched quite a few of the 2020 Oscar-nominated movies and found them quite stodgy, and a few things on Netflix equally as stodgy, some just like dampened by obvious technique, and this just felt so refreshing again. It felt like, I don't know, I can't even think of a tasty metaphor for how refreshing it was to watch it. It's like, I can't think, I was going to say like jumping into a bath of lemonade or something. Do you know what I mean? Like something, can't think of anything that doesn't demean how refreshing it was to watch this and feel like, this is really great cinema.
I've seen it before, which maybe explains why I'm not as exuberant as you are about it. But
not stripping off for my lemonade bar.
But it is definitely a not first film. Do you know what I mean? It's one of those films where the director's had enough experience to do some hit and miss stuff first. It's like the perfect second or third movie.
It's almost like he's finished his apprenticeship and found his voice. And this is supposed to be the first in a trilogy of Wender's road movies. Is that right? Have you seen the other two?
Yes, I have. It wasn't mapped out as a trilogy, but he made another two road movies following Wrong Movement and...
Is it King of the Road?
Kings of the Road. Well, that's the UK title. The actual German title is more like In the Course of Time.
Oh, right, okay.
Which, again, I want to watch again. I'm not as fond of those two as I was of Alice, but I'm really keen to see Kings of the Road again. I think maybe I'm more ready for that than I was when I was 19.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And yeah, I haven't seen Paris, Texas for a long time. I want to go and see that again. It's a very good double bill with Alice in the Cities, as in, it's a different adult-child relationship, but it's another adult-child road movie.
Yeah. I mean, as we've been saying, I think we've covered a lot of the truth of the film, which is enjoying the moments when they're there.
Oh, it's good. We've covered the themes in the moment, rather.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. As we get a bit retrospective, I think we realise that we were there. For me, it's a new discovery and like a really welcome experience. I think I'm gonna, like I mentioned before, pick up the Blu-ray.
I mean, I'm pleased because I used to have it. As I said, I used to have it in my top 10 films list, and one of my, I have to broaden beyond 10 films now, but it's definitely still one of my favourite films, and it's nice to have that refreshed. I think, I wouldn't recommend it blindly to everyone. I think I would have to give it some context and say, can you do this? Can you enjoy a movie that's paced this way and that's this gentle? But with that caveat, I love it. I'd recommend it to most people.
Yeah, me too. I just think it's one of those things that is like, when you watch a film that is life affirming, that's about the joy of just living and experiencing life. It's not very often a filmmaker can do that without stepping too far either way, making it too dramatic or too saccharine. I think this just was so perfectly judged and life affirming. I just think it's like a really well measured, well judged, beautifully crafted piece of film. I'm really happy to have discovered it and to do whatever I can to share it with the world.